Why does the groom Marcel devour the father of the bride at the wedding? What kind of monster is he? Subscribe and join us on this wild journey. My husband started telling dad jokes before he was old enough to pour his own juice. So I may have missed a red flag or 2 or 4, but in my defense, this kind of juvenile behavior seemed very unbrand at the time. Let me give you some quick context. The entire first year Stephen and I lived together anytime we exchanged "I love yous." He would quickly pinch my cheek and shout, "Is it make your own damn waffles?" Neither of us even liked waffles. He just got a kick out of spoiling the moment, and although I'd groan and roll my eyes, his dumb shtick cracked me up. Lord help me. It absolutely cracked me up. So when I shuffled into the kitchen one morning fresh from sleep, his odd remark barely registered. "Can you see me smile?" I glanced at Stephen from across the center island. What? He leaned back and blinked. "What, thought you said something?" He shrugged and shook his head. My imagination then, as I poured a cup of coffee, he said it again quieter. This time, "Can you see me smile?" Here we go. ST's chokes were usually unfunny for that first week or 2, until his relentless commitment tickled my funny bone. "That's nice, honey," I said after a yawn. Then I circled the island and went in for a kiss, but instead noticed the sore beneath his left nostril. "Oh, get some cream on that." On my way out of the room, Stephen began ratcheting coughs. Things seemed normal for the next few days. He periodically dropped a smile line mid-conversation, and then continued on like normal once or twice. He even said it over the phone. "Hey hun, I'm at the store. Do we need any? Can you see me smile? Kitchen roll." Stephen picked up some cream for his increasingly gruesome scab, although that didn't seem to help. If anything, it made things worse. One evening, as we sat down to dinner, he slurped up some pasta, stared dead into my eyes and twisted his mouth in this horrible pumpkin grin. "Can you see me smile?" I sat down my fork. "Okay, enough, it's been a week and I'm still not laughing." "What are you talking about?" "That's stupid. Can you see me smile? Can you see me smile thing?" He cocked his head to the side. Don't even start. Just drop it already." The two of us went back and forth, him pushing me to explain myself, me growing steadily more agitated. "Can't you just admit this gag didn't land and move on?" "Well, the only gags that do land are ones about airplanes. But I still don't understand what you're talking about." The tension immediately dissolved as I half groaned, half chuckled at his zinger. Later, as I soaked in the tube with 2 cucumber slices over my eyes, the door at the far side of the room creaked open. Steve and I called another creak hello. I slid up, catching the slices. There was no one else in the steamy room. The draft had most likely blown the door open. I settled back into a comfortable position afterward, while toweling myself off. I noticed a smiley face in the fogged-up mirror above the sink, accompanied by the words, "Can you see me smile?" Stephen had already turned in for the night, so my lecture about boundaries got placed on hold until morning. Sometime after midnight, an awful dream about falling into this endless black void startled me awake for a moment. The sensation carried into the real world, no doubt because the mattress had compressed beneath our combined weight. I opened my eyes in an attempt to escape the sensation of that awful dream and saw Stephen, who held himself directly above me, supported by his elbows and knees. His nose was pressed right up against mine. I bit down on a screen. Stephen's sore had spread. Now he looked like a toddler after devouring a plate of jam sandwiches. Was he picking at those oozing scabs? What the? I shouted immediately. He rolled onto his half of the bed and faced the wall, tending to snore. I thumped the back of his skull hard. "You almost gave me a heart attack." He acted all innocent, like he just woke up, the corners of his mouth twitching as though pulled by invisible strings. Oh, what was that for? He propped up against the backboard, one hand rubbing the bump across the back of his head, the other fingering a leaky sore under his chin. Turning away, I said, "This is getting seriously old. You're not funny." He began to protest, but then entered a harsh coughing fit. It rose from deep inside his chest. "As he rise down the hall, and go see a dermatologist." I shouted after him, when the alarm screeched. The far side of the bed was still empty. I crossed the upstairs landing and went into the bathroom, where Stephen stood before the sink, eyes fixed on his own reflection. He stretched and twisted his lips, which had gone pale at the corners, using his forefingers from the doorway. I said, "Look, sorry, but last night do you scare the crap out of me. Can we act like the whole thing never happened?" He pulled the sides of his mouth apart. The gums looked grey and unhealthy. I rolled my eyes fine on my way across the hall. He shouted, "Can you see me smile?" I called my mom from work, who listened to me vent for 20 minutes. He just won't give it a rest with this smiling thing. Be up front, explain how much it's bothering you. That sounded reasonable. Stephen liked juvenile jokes, granted, but he wasn't a man-child or anything. Most likely the two of us could get this straightened out, and then go for a romantic meal someplace fancy back home. Stephen was in the downstairs lounge, furiously scribbling into a notebook. "Can we talk?" I asked. He stayed hunched forward, his attention fixated on his writing. "Sorry if I was a little short-tempered last night. I didn't mean to hit you so hard, but this joke, it really got under my skin. You think we could pretend the whole thing never happened?" No response. "Can you please answer me, or at least acknowledge you're listening?" I moved forward and snatched the notepad away. Stephen stood suddenly enough to startle me and grabbed it back for a split second. I glimpsed the words, "Can you see me smile?" written over and over again. He grinned, exposing teeth of startling whiteness had he bleached them. This wasn't a joke anymore. It was full-blown mental illness. "Stephen, talk to me, what's wrong?" He cleared his watery throat. "Can you see me smile?" He tossed the notebook aside and took a single step forward. Arms outstretched. Thin trickles of blood ran along his chin, from where he'd compulsively nibbled his bottom lip. "Can you see me smile?" I retreated into the hall. "Stephen, can you see me smile?" He coughed harshly before saying it again, in a kind of hoarse growl. Thick wads of saliva flew from those pale lips. I spun on my heels and made for the door, Stephen walking after me. "Can you see me smile?" He followed me out of the house and across the front walkway. The second I pulled the door of my Ford Escort shut, he drum-rolled the window. "Can you see me smile? Can you see me smile?" As I slipped the vehicle into gear, he breathed over the glass to fog it up, and wrote a backward CA, and it's a miracle I didn't plow over him barreling out of that driveway. In reverse, my eyes had gone all red and puffy by the time I reached Mom's place. The police showed zero interest in Stephen's condition. "Yeah, sure, your husband keeps telling you to smile. We'll get right on that." Neither did the paramedics. "You want us to send an ambulance over a nasty rash?" Stephen didn't respond to any of my messages nor answer my calls that night. I lay awake praying he was okay, that he'd made use of the mental health resources I'd sent over. Mom told me to steer clear until we could arrange for somebody to accompany me home. But laying in that cold, empty bed, I had terrible nightmares about Stephen hurting himself. He needed help and I couldn't wait. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was entirely dark, and as the aroma hit me the second I pushed open the front door, a strangely familiar coppery scent. There were dull thuds from somewhere upstairs. I slowly climbed the steps in the landing. I flicked on the light and stifled a yell. Scribbled up and down the walls were the words, "Can you see me smile?" Stephen had covered every inch of space from floor to ceiling. My heart kicked into a higher gear. The door to the bathroom sat slightly ajar. I tiptoed forward, the color of the writing, switching from black to red, and what I assumed was lipstick or paint. Gently, I rapped the door. "Stephen." I called so low I almost couldn't hear myself. Then after a little while I went in. My husband was crouched in the corner, naked, his back to me. He dragged a lobster red hand up and down the wall, smearing the word SE over the cream-colored tiles, stopping only to replenish the ink by vomiting thick red FL onto his fingers. Oh phoo, it was blood. He'd written those words with his own blood. "Can you see me smile?" He snarled along with a full-body spasm. There was something wrong with his voice. He sounded like a patient in a dentist's chair with a prop in their mouth. The door made a cray sound. As I flinched back without meaning to, Stephen's head perked up. I spun into the hall and raced toward the stairs. Halfway there, Stephen threw himself hard against the back of my legs, sending us both careening down the steps. I landed flat on my back, directly above my head. Two blurry light bulbs circled one another. I watched them go round and round until two Stephens, their mouths caked with dry crusty blood, leaned into my window of vision. He pinned me down, and between gruesome wheezes that slid up from his throat, he repeated those 5 words again and again. As my vision stabilized, I realized it wasn't just blood on his face. Tendons and jaw muscles were exposed, bullying and vibrating like overtuned guitar strings. Fragments of bone even shined through in places. The lips and the surrounding area had been chewed or cut or scratched away. His cheeks hung loose and torn flaps. He brought us nose to nose, his exposed inches from my mouth. "Can you see me smile?" That raw sewage breath, absolutely RA. A big purple tongue slid out of his mouth, finding its way inside my right nostril. As I lashed out against him, raw meat peeled away beneath my fingernails. He eventually made a sound like cat, hacking up a furball, exposed teeth, shattering and closing and crunching. I seized the opportunity by worming my way out from under him and made a break for the kitchen, where I armed myself with a steak knife. He followed me into the room. "Canines B, I'm warning you," I screamed. He grinned, although I could tell only by the eyes, those mad eyes that almost seemed to laugh. As he shuffled forward, his pincer jaw clamped shut again and again. Finally he lunged and I rammed that knife straight into his throat. Stephen's body went completely limp before slumping onto the floor. The paramedics actually wretched when they arrived. "Craziest thing I ever saw," said the taller of the pair. A police officer couldn't believe the story. Still a stammering mess. I recounted how Stephen had mutilated himself before attacking me over and over. He took me to the station for an official statement, after which Mom took me to her place, where, for some odd reason, my mouth wouldn't stay closed. I sobbed into her shoulder, licking my lips again and again. My tongue had the texture of a carpet, plus something kept turning over in my gut. Acid reflux, maybe. Eventually urge to open my mouth and let out a giant irresistible yawn overpowered me. Then Mom reeled away, her face laced with concern. "What do you mean, honey?" I threw her a confused look and scratched my itchy mouth. "What do you mean?" "What do I mean?" She reached over and wiped a tear off my cheek. "Why wouldn't I be able to see you smile? I should not have subscribed to my girlfriend's OnlyFans account." I admitted I am a simp, and no, I am not proud of that fact. If I could go back in time and stop myself when I first started acting like one, I would in a heartbeat, but I was a horny little goblin back then, and just the tiniest bit of attention from a woman was enough to fry my brain in my defense. Though she was absolutely gorgeous, brown eyes that twinkled, mischievously plump, kissable red lips that parted to reveal white teeth like perfect little sugar cubes, and thick dark hair that gently tickled her shoulder blades. Her dresses clung to her like they couldn't get enough of her body, and I understood why. She had just the right amount of curves in just the right places. I wanted to sink my teeth into them, just scrumptious. I couldn't believe. When she smiled at me, jaw dropped open like a drawbridge. I stared at her from my seat in the cafe, wondering when the dream would end. It didn't, not even when she got up and click-clacked over to me, her heels making her hips sway hypnotically. She slipped into the chair in front of me and asked whether I was staring at her. Dear God, her voice. It was like she was pouring nectar into my ears. I shook my head like an idiot. She laughed, and it was music like birds singing an ode to the falling leaves on an autumn morning. Cute, she said and bit her bottom lip. And that was that one meeting, and she had me wrapped around her fingers to say that our relationship was a whir, when romance would be an understatement. It all feels like a blur to me, like the view inside a train that is zooming past yours in the opposite direction. I had no idea how she so quickly wriggled her way into my life, settling in like she had always belonged there. I felt like God himself was smiling down on me and not one to spit on my blessings. I agreed with whatever she suggested, unknowingly losing myself in her. Piece by piece I changed my dressing sense for her, dropped my childhood friends like the dead weight that they were, quit playing video games, because it is a child's hobby, not something a grown man in his mid-20s should ever waste his time with. I sold off my G.I. Joe collection, got a job I hated, bought a car that was too expensive and took out a loan for a house much bigger than we could have possibly needed, and added her name to the deed, all to please the political succubus. At least the sex was heavenly, so heavenly in fact that I didn't even protest much when she told me she was going to start an OnlyFans account. It'll be good for us, she said, flashing her slender wrists at me, making my heart melt. We need the money, babe. Besides, they only get to look, only you can touch me. I sighed, loosened my tie and grunted, just don't tell me what you post on there, I don't want to know. She squealed with joy and jumped on my lap, reminding me why I was putting up with all this in the first place. That's when things started to go wrong. Terribly, horrifyingly wrong. I would wake up from nightmares. I could never remember more exhausted than I had been when I crashed into bed that would get so to the wood with my sweat. I began sleeping longer, but had absolutely no energy during the day. My skin was losing its color. My eyes had dark circles deep like gorges, and my hands would tremble with weakness. At first I chalked it all up to stress. I was overworked, without friends, stuck in a superficial relationship, and burdened with staggering financial obligations. Of course my body was finally starting to give out. I wasn't a machine, after all, was I? But then the bruises started to appear on my hands, thighs, back, knees, elbows. My body was being dotted with these little red marks that would inexplicably appear each morning, and they would hurt like the bite of a fire ant. She had no clue what was causing this, but I did. It all began with that damn OnlyF account, and I knew I was going to get my answers there. I quickly set up an account and subscribed to hers, but to my utter disappointment, there was nothing out of the ordinary. They're just lingeries, pictures, a couple of full-body nudes. That's it, nothing that would explain what I was going through. This was because she had another account under a pseudonym, one that she never told me about. Thank God for my connections in the IT sector. I was only able to track it down thanks to them. As soon as my phone buzzed with the message telling me about her alt account, I ran into the bathroom at the office and locked myself in the first empty stall. I wiped the sweat off my hands and unlocked my phone with shaky thumbs. I made the payment and got access to her account, and what I saw made my head spin in fear. It was just the most bizarre collection of pictures. Animal skulls mounted on some sort of a greasy altar, candles arranged around a strange chalk diagram on the floor of our basement, grainy photos of rotting carcasses of dogs with their entrails ripped out and laid in a circle around them. Close-up pictures of accident victims in their cars, limbs cut off, flesh burnt, black skin melting off, eyes crushed to Aishka jelly. How were these photos up? How did she even get them? Why had the folks over at OnlyFans not deleted them? I could feel bile rise up in my throat as I scrolled past those pictures, and the comments to those pictures were just as confusing. Strange symbols and squiggly lines that I had never seen on a keyboard made up the comments, all of them hundreds of comments, all in what seemed to be a completely new language. But what terrified me the most were the videos. A primal terror clutched at my chest as I watched those videos. Unlike the pictures, she starred in each and every single one of them, as did I. Some of them were innocent enough. They'd start with her holding the camera and pointing it at her face. She would bring it closer and closer to her mouth until her blood-red lips were almost touching the lens, and then she'd start whispering "aang." I plugged in my earphones and turned the volume up to the max to hear what she's saying, but it was utter nonsense. I couldn't make heads or tails out if it sounded like no language I had ever heard, yet scared the out of me. It was like she was running her tongue around inside my ears, threatening to condemn me to a fate worse than that. She would then walk and come stand over my sleeping form. The video would now speed up, and she would stand over me for hours as I tossed and turned, tormented by my nightmares. She would stand over me, pointing the camera down on my face. I took a second to count my heartbeat, which thumped against my chest, my ears and my temple before moving on another video. This time the camera was set up on a tripod next to my bed. She was there again, lunged over my sleeping form, but this time she didn't just watch. She bent over, splayed my forearm out and drove a little needle into it, quickly licking the drops of blood that bubbled out before turning and grinning at the camera, the greenish night vision making her eyes gleam. I gasped and almost dropped the phone. There were so many of these videos, her injuring me, licking the blood off and then grinning at the camera, literally hundreds of them, all with the same script. And then I moved on to the most recent video. The screen flickered to life and our basement came into view. It didn't look anything like I was familiar with, lit up by candles to bath the room in a dull orange glow. The entire basement had been turned into some sort of an altar, like the pictures I had earlier seen. Unclean cattle skulls were strewn across the room. The floor was slathered with squiggly chalk lines set up in strange symbols. Fairies with dizzying designs embroidered on them hung from the rafters, and smoke arose from somewhere off-screen. In the middle out of it all, though, was the love of my life. Nude, with her entire body soaked in blood, she was writhing on the floor, touching herself and moaning in a hoarse and guttural voice dropped up on a small table. In front of her was a framed picture of me with the eyes burnt off, probably with a cigarette. The fear that crashed into me brought tears to my eyes. She began rubbing herself faster and faster and faster and faster and faster, until her hand was just a red blur on the screen. Sharp shadows danced on her face as she began speaking soon. She said soon, 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 soon. Her voice rose with each words, until she was screaming in a manic frenzy, until the words reverberated like gunshots in the basement, and then the video came to an abrupt end. I blinked furiously to clear my rapidly fading vision, trying to wrest control of my body from the terror that threatened to shut it down, and then my phone buzzed again, and I almost had a heart attack when I saw the message, "Hey babe, when are you coming home tonight? There's a man who follows me around and narrates my life, and he's started to say some unsettling things. He's always been here, although I actually don't know if he's a he, and though I wouldn't want to assume anything, the voice is definitely a male's voice. I've never seen his face, always the back of him. He wears a black trench coat, with a popped collar, so that all I can really see is the very top of his head, and part of his black boots. I can't communicate with him, and I figured this out a few years back. He just stands a few feet away from me at all times, his back to me, narrating my entire life. No one else can see him. I figured this out a few years back as well. Nor can they hear him. My day usually starts off the same. I always wake up to the same sentence. Natalia wakes up and rolls over in her bed every single day. He says that because that is what I do. It's all very mundane. My life is not that interesting. After all, I've sort of learned to live with it and I can almost tune him out now. I've never really told anyone else about him, because I know that no one would believe me. So I really don't have much of a choice other than learning to deal with it, and tuning him out when I really need to. About a week ago, I was cooking dinner, mashed potatoes and black bean tacos, and tuning him out as normal as I was chopping up some cilantro for my tacos. However, he said something that caught my attention. Natalia is innocently chopping cilantro without any knowledge that she is in grave danger. I froze the knife in the middle of my small pile of cilantro and looked over at him. He was standing on the other side of the kitchen island facing my dinner table. What? I asked. Knowing that he wasn't going to reply at this point, I think I'd be more freaked out about him replying than him not. He said nothing for a few minutes, so I finished chopping, wiping the pieces of cilantro that got stuck to the blade with my finger and cutting it. In the process, I turned around and turned on the faucet, rinsing the knife and my finger. Natalia cut herself and her blood oozes out, pleasing the one who watches. I turned the faucet off and turned around. He hadn't moved, but I was sure that I heard him correctly. I walked over to the window on the wall to my left and pulled on the cord, shutting the blinds. As I became paranoid, I managed to eat my dinner and do the dishes without any other weird comments and got ready for bed. As I got sleep here, I reached over and turned off the lamp by my bed, rolling over onto my left side and closing my eyes. Natalia rolls over, closing her eyes and peacefully lying in her bed. What she doesn't know, however, is that she will soon face horrible fate that will end in her death. I opened my eyes, sitting up and looking over at his silhouette slightly lit by the moonlight. I waited a few minutes, but he said nothing else and I eventually fell asleep. I woke up the next morning as my alarm went off. Natalia wakes up and rolls over in bed one day closer to her inevitable death. I got up walking into the bathroom and slamming the door shut, annoyed and a little bit scared. He had been narrating my entire life, and had never said anything creepy or out of the ordinary. So what was going on now? I opened the faucet and began splashing water on my face. Natalia washes her face, but she doesn't seem to realize that it is much easier for someone to attack when her eyes are closed. I rinsed the soap away from my eye area and looked at my reflection in front of me and at his standing behind me. I finished rinsing my face with my eyes open and managed to dry it without completely covering my eyes. The rest of my week went pretty similar, normal narrations, for the most part, with some creepy stuff sprinkled in. He is coming for her very soon. It is unavoidable. Natalia must die. Every time he said something, I looked around at my surroundings paranoid. I spent the entire week anxious and paranoid. I barely slept, fearing that I would wake up in the middle of the night. Do some performing spontaneous surgery on me. I put a knife in my bedside drawer and pepper spray under my pillow. Yesterday there were more creepy things than usual. Natalia's days are numbered. Natalia has been feeling anxious, as she should. The one who watches is arriving shortly. The one who watches is very excited to kill Natalia. There will be no escape, only death. I didn't go out anywhere for fear that would somehow cause whatever was going to happen sooner. Last night I was getting ready for bed, brushing my teeth and staring at his reflection behind me in the mirror, as I swished mouthwash around in my mouth. He spoke again. Natalia brushes her teeth for the last time. Tomorrow she dies. I spit out the mouthwash, choking on a bit that had made its way down my throat. I coughed and wheezed. Natalia choked on the mouthwash, feeling like she was dying. But it's not her time. Yet her time is tomorrow. I managed to catch my breath and walked over to my bed, crawling in and leaving the lamps on. The last thing I needed was to be woken up at midnight and have to fight off a killer in the dark. I woke up today a few hours before my alarm and got up. I was still alive and nothing was out of place. Maybe I wasn't going to die today. Maybe it was all some sort of fluke. I walked into the bathroom and grabbed my toothbrush. I squeezed out some toothpaste to brush my teeth and put the toothbrush in my mouth. I looked up into the mirror at my reflection and then I froze. I spit into the sink and looked around the bathroom. I stuck my head back into my bedroom and looked around there as well. I made my way through every single room in my house, but he was nowhere to be seen. He was gone 25 years following me around and narrating my life, and now suddenly, when I was supposed to die, he just disappeared somehow. This made me feel worse as I realized that while the things he was saying were creepy, they were also helping me by warning me how much time I had left. Now I had no warning and no choice, but to wait it out and see what happened. I can't shake the feeling that I'm definitely going to die, but how and by who was the one who watches? What did that even mean? I've spent my entire day in the kitchen. I figure there are more exits here, as well as weapons, and I'd probably be safer here than in another smaller room of the house. So far nothing has happened. I've been sitting in silence, which is odd, because I've never been in complete silence. About an hour ago all the lights began to flicker in the house, but that only lasted a few seconds, and it's gone back to normal now. I still don't know what to expect, but I think I'm probably safer at my house. Well, I thought I would be until the doorbell rang. I got up and walked into the living room, walking up to the door and peering out of the people. It was him. He was standing outside on my porch with his back to me. As usual. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe, as I just watched him standing there. He's still out there now, but he hasn't said a word. I'm still in my kitchen, not knowing what to do. I could hear him mumbling outside the door a few minutes ago, and I decided to get up and listen. 2, 1999, 1998, 1997. He's still counting down and I've now got about 20 minutes left. I can see that it's getting darker and darker outside as he counts down, even though it's not even 3:00 in the afternoon. Yet every time I look at the window, something disappears: a house on my street, a car, a tree. Whenever something vanishes, it's replaced with darkness, and he keeps counting down. This might be my last chance at communication. I'm going to die today. I'm a nurse. Last night I saw something strange on the ER security camera. I was sitting at the nurse's station reading trashy tabloids and drinking coffee. When Olga, the other nurse on duty, poked my arm, the little girl escaped. She said with a giggle what she pointed to the security camera feed. Little Maline was standing in the hallway. Her image grainy and pixelated. We'd admitted Maline at 8:23 p.m. Little girl no more than 6. Her face covered in blood. She'd taken a nasty fall down the stairs. Dr. Thompson was worried she might develop a subdural hematoma, so we were keeping her for overnight. Oh no, she shouldn't be up. I paused, leaning towards the monitor. And where'd she get those clothes? She wasn't wearing the hospital gown. We put her to bed in. No, she was wearing a black dress, white stockings and shiny black shoes, as if she were all dressed up for church, or a funeral, and she kept whipping her head back and forth, as if expecting someone to come down the hallway. Well, are you going to go get her or not? Olga said, looking up from her phone. Yeah, I'll get her. I pushed the chair out, leapt up and speed walked down the hallway. Maline, I called as I rounded the corner. Medell. My breath caught in my throat. There was no one there. I walked up to her room. Maline, I called, poking my head in. She was sleeping peacefully in bed in her hospital gown with her 4 still attached. Weird. I walked back to the nurse's station. I couldn't help feeling a bit unsettled. I know kids sometimes do freaky, but there's no way a 6-year-old could reattach and fall. I flopped back down at the nurse's station. Olga raised her eyebrows at me. You found her? Yeah, she's sleeping in her room. I leaned towards her and lowered my voice. This is going to sound really weird, but I don't think she ever got out of bed. Oh, spooky, she said with a grin. Maybe she's possessed by that slime thing you wouldn't shut up about last week. Back to texting. I narrowed my eyes at her. That's not something to joke about. Oh really, what are you going to do, murder me? She held up her hands in front of her. I'm so scared. I rolled my eyes and turned back to reading about the half-mermaid that apparently washed up on the shores of Lake Eerie. Sure, I can't believe people actually believe this stuff. I thought it was 3:40 a.m. when it happened again. I happened to look up at the hallway, and the security monitor caught my eye. Maline was standing just outside her door in her dress and stockings, except she looked scared this time. Look, it's Madeline again, I said, poking Olga. As I said it, one of the lights flickered out at the far end of the hallway. The video feed grew darker. Olga looked up from her texting. Who was she even texting after 3:00 a.m., and followed my gaze. Oh, it's the little demon girl again. I narrowed my eyes at her. If you think all of this is so funny, you go check on. Her eyes widened a bit. Okay. She slowly got up, taking as long as humanly possible. Then she disappeared down the hallway. I turned back to the video feed. Another light had gone out at the end of the hall. The video was darker and grainier now, but I could still make out Mine's little form standing in front of the room, barely more than a silhouette. Click. Another light went out, then another and another. The hallway was quickly engulfed in darkness, until the only light on was the one above Mine's door. What crap? I muttered to myself, we're going to need an electrician. I drank the last drgs of my iced coffee. When I put the cup down, I saw it. My blood ran cold. It was a shadow, a grainy pixelated silhouette, row-boiling and shifting in the darkness. At first I thought it was Olga coming from the other end of the hall. It wasn't. It was too tall, stretching from the ceiling to the floor, too thin. No offense, Olga. I leaned into the monitor. What the hell? The shadow got darker, larger, slowly bled out of the darkness, and into the light of the hall right next to Maline. It was so dark and subtle. I thought it might be just some trick of the camera, some error of the low light. But Madeline saw it too, because she was backing away, stretching her arms over the open hospital room door, shaking her head violently. The shadow advanced. Beep. My eyes snapped away from the security system to the nurse's console. No, Mine's vitals were plummeting, her heart, great blood pressure. I shot up and sprinted down the hallway. Olga had just gotten there, her hand on the doorknob. Half the hallway was dark, just like in the feed, but no tall shadow like I'd seen. No Maline standing in the hallway. Call Dr. Thompson, I screamed. She's in trouble. I flew past her into the room. Maline lay still and motionless on the bed. Her heart had stopped. I ran over, started CPR. Come on. I screamed internally. Please don't take her from us, please, Flip. Her heartbeat returned just as Dr. Thompson rushed in. I fell against the wall and began to soup. We kept Maline in the hospital for a few more days, but I don't think we needed to. She seemed to recover quickly as I checked her vitals to release her. I'd nearly forgotten all about the shadow. How are you feeling? I asked her as I took her blood pressure. Great, Maline said. She turned to her parents. She saved me. Oh, it was nothing. She glanced at me. Not you, she said condescendingly, Maggie. I furrowed my eyebrows at her ungrateful little kid. Who's Maggie? Mine's mother uneasily stared at the floor. Her father wrapped an arm around her and coughed strangely. "Okay, then you're all set," I said, ripping off the blood pressure cuff. "Yay," she squealed. She grabbed her mom's hand and the two of them walked into the hallway, but the father stayed behind. "Thank you so much for everything," he said with a smile. "As I understand it, you saved mine's life." "No, that was Maggie," I said, rolling my eyes. He coughed again. Strangely, the curiosity bit into me, completely overstepping my bounds as a nurse. I asked, "Who's Maggie, her imaginary friend?" He sighed heavily. Sort of, when my wife was pregnant with Maline. She was actually pregnant with twins. My heart stopped. Identical twins, but one of them passed away in the womb. He continued. "We told Maline, since we don't believe in keeping secrets, but it appears we made a mistake. Little Maline has an overactive imagination, always talks about Maggie, as if she's actually still with us." He coughed again. Strangely, and I realized it was to stop an impending SOB. He reached out to shake my hand. "Thank you so much again." He turned and followed his family down the hallway, but all I could think about was the little girl, who looked exactly like Maline, standing up outside her door protecting her. The worst wedding I've ever photographed. I've been a wedding photographer for nearly 10 years and I thought I'd seen it all: trashy, beautiful, tragic, hilarious, or just bizarre. I have stories. I have the typical groom getting caught getting it on with the M of honor, family getting into brawls, brides owing in the bathroom, gay couples having no one attend their wedding, or worse, the one uninvited homophobic relative crashing to just be a dick stories. But we aren't here for the typical stories. If we were, we'd be here all day. We are here for the wedding from last October. All weddings are probably my favorite. If I ever get married, I'll probably get hitched in the fall. It was the parents of the bride who came to me asking for my services for a wedding in 2 weeks. Their original photographer apparently up and quit on them, and they were desperate to have their darling daughter's wedding immortalized in picture format. Luckily for them, I had a clear schedule. I did charge them quite a bit extra for the suddenness of it all, but judging by the father's Rolex, it wasn't that big a deal. One thing I'm good at guessing is a family's wealth status. And once again, and I was on point, the SE rights were rolling in dough. Not that I really like them, though I'm not required to like all my clients, although it does make things a bit more relaxing. Harold Sight absolutely leered at my chest whenever he thought I wasn't looking, and Carol was clearly the trophy wife that was over the hill. I've never seen a human being that genuinely looked more like plastic than her. Nothing wrong with plastic surgery or Botox, but there's got to be a cutoff at some point. I think I should have been more off-put by the parents coming to me rather than the bride, but I just figured said bride was busy with other wedding planning, and didn't think too hard on it. They came and oh boy, I realized I was getting into something I didn't want to be a part of. Right away. First time I saw the bride, I had a brief moment of I don't know how old this girl is. She could have been 16, she could have been just 18, definitely not over 20, though I've seen young marriages when it's a shotgun affair. But then I met the groom, Marcel Wingate, who was definitely no younger than 30, and Marcel was just something felt off. The man was a giant. For one. He towered over me, let alone Tanya, with his long pale face and sunken eyes. He could have been Lurch from The Addams Family when he shook my hand and introduced himself. I barely rest a shiver, but years of practice helped me to smile and act like there wasn't something slimy about all of this. Sona never said a word when she was made over for her big day. Only Carol did. Chirping and twittering about how about you make her hair a little bigger or make her eyes pop. She has such pretty eyelashes. Luckily Carol had to go have a smoke every 15 minutes, so the makeup and hair people could have a moment to actually work by the time it was all over. Sun looked perfect. Her dress was basically a white ball gown. Thera was placed in her strawberry blonde hair, cheeks blushing a perfect pink, But unlike most brides, she still hadn't said a word, and those weren't sure, as hell tears of joy she was holding back. I'm sure you've heard about the first look photo fad. I find it great to get that perfect expression a groom makes when he sees the bride in her dress for the first time. It's usually quite cute. This was the first time I've shot a first look photo where I truly believe it was the first time the bride and groom have actually looked at each other. Marcel did seem to have his breath taken away by his lovely bride, but her expression was less than thrilled, as he took her hand and gave it a tight squeeze. My stomach turned when he leaned in for a kiss on the cheek, and she quite obviously flinched. It's time I put a pin on the myth that arranged marriages only happen in foreign countries, and only people from certain cultures take part in it. They happen all the time in the US, and more often than not it's an old man who wants a virgin bride, and by virgin I mean still in high school. This wouldn't even be the first one I was hired to photograph. I managed to catch Tanya alone in the room. She got ready and sitting next to the open window, and twirling an unlit cigarette between her fingers need a light. I offered as I came in, "No thanks. I don't smoke, but they say it makes you feel better, right?" she said, looking up at me with those doll-like blue eyes. "It also gives you lung and throat cancer." I took the cigarette from her and lit it up for myself, but I'm a bad example. "So do as I say, not as I do now." That got a smile out of her, even if it only lasted a second. "How often do you smoke?" she asked. "Depends on the day. Usually I have 2 or 3 bad days. I can have a few more." I lowered the cigarette and looked down at her. "How old are you, Tanya?" 19, 20. In a few weeks I have a bit of a baby face. She poked one of her cheeks. "Why do you care?" I glanced at the door to make sure Carol wasn't going to barge in. "Da. Are you not okay with this? The wedding?" I asked quietly. Da's eyes widened. "Damn, you're good." She also glanced at the door. "Harold. My stepdad arranged all of this. If he had it his way, it would have happened when I was 15, but Marcel kept delaying business. Apparently he tried to delay another year, but my dad implied he had other offers." She shivered and wrapped her arms around herself. "If I said no, Harold would kick me out and cut me off, frozen my bank account. I'd have nothing and no one, and I don't know what I'd do if that happened." I reached into my purse and pulled out one of my business cards, flipped the card over. It has a number for a woman's shelter. They specialize in helping women escape from dangerous home situations. Hides them, helps them get started in a new city, if need be. Below that is my personal home number. If you just need to talk. Okay. Da took the card and clung onto it tightly before tucking it into her bra. "You might be the nicest person I've ever met," she murmured. I gave her shoulder a squeeze. "I try," I said before extinguishing the cigarette on the windowsill. "If you need to escape anytime tonight, just ask me to help you go to the bathroom. We can pull a whole runaway bride." I joked that got another laugh out of her just in time for her mom to pop into the room. "Well, what's taking so long? Hurry up. The wedding is going to be starting in 15 minutes, and I don't want you to cry and make your face all blotchy and ugly." She whined. Da's brief joy faded, and she gave me one more sad look before following her mother out. The ceremony would have been so much more beautiful if I didn't know the dir little secret behind it all. Tar didn't smile once. I don't think even one of those bridesmaids was an actual friend of hers, or at least not a sincere one. When the priest said you may kiss the bride, Tanya let one tear slip down her cheek. When Marcel leaned down to kiss her, I was seriously considering calling the cops. But what could they do? Da would likely cave and say nothing was wrong, and since she wasn't a minor, they couldn't label Marcel Edo and her stepfather a child seller. It still didn't make the situation any less shitty. All I could do was snap pictures of the worst day of Tanya's life at the reception. I was constantly being nagged by Carol about what pictures to take, to the point where I wanted to rip her hair out. But I did notice something different about the first dance between the couple. Tanya at first was stiff as a board, reluctant to even touch Marcel, but he leaned down and whispered something in her ear. Her entire demeanor changed in a blink of an eye to one of surprise, and I managed to read her lips. Really, Marcel nodded, and I managed to catch a picture of the first smile Tanya had since she said I do by the end of the dance. She was actually starting to get into it, resting her head on his chest. As they swayed to 1,000 years. It was a complete 180 change. Daniel was now one of the happiest and, dare I say it, flirtiest brides I've ever seen. She even leaned up to kiss him on the cheek as they sat down, something that took even Marcel by surprise. Judging by how he blushed, I genuinely started to wonder if Marcel slipped something in her drink to get her acting so happy when Carol started to nag me again about where her husband was. She was the kind of mother who forgot this was her child's wedding instead of her own, and she wanted pictures of her and Harold in order to get the away from her. I told her I'd go find him. He'd been hitting the open bar a little hard that night. I assumed he was in the bathroom, either throwing up or cheating on his wife. It could have gone either way. At that point, when I approached the men's room, I heard something that sounded like gargling or swallowing you. I know, but I kind of hoped to ruin this nasty bitch's day if her husband really was cheating. So I opened the bathroom door. With my camera at the ready, I made eye contact with Harold, or rather I made eye contact with Harold's head. It was sitting in the sink, expression twisted in abject horror. The room was soaked in blood. Body parts strewn around the floor. Meanwhile, Marcel had stripped out of his tuxedo, and was currently swallowing Harold's arm. Now I was wondering if I'd had something slipped into my champagne. Humans can just unhinge their jaw like that, each gulp taking Marcel's arm deeper down his throat. I saw the tip of Harold's fingers disappear with a small wave of goodbye, and then I dropped my camera. Yes, I heard something break. No, I didn't care. I just saw the groom eat the goddamn father of the bride. Marcel's head shut up and his eyes. Before now they were a dull watery grey, but now they were teal-lead brown and red with slitted pupils. I felt frozen when those eyes looked at me. Oh, I'm terribly sorry. One moment Marcel turned to the sink that was free of a man's head and vomited. I heard several things clatter on the porcelain before he fetched them out and washed them off with an embarrassed clearing of his throat. He walked up to me and pulled me into the bathroom. I thought I was dead, but instead Marcel placed several diamonds in my palm for the camera. I didn't mean to start you, he said. I managed to get out as I stared at the literal handful of diamonds. This would pay for more than the camera. Why did you devour Harold? Oh, I've wanted to do that for years. Marcel chuckled as he grabbed some paper towels to wipe off his chin. Like that would take away from the fact he was still naked and bloody in front of me. A terrible person actually tastes quite divine. You would taste absolutely terrible. It'd be like swallowing nails. Meanwhile, a man who offers his own daughter as a sacrificial lamb does something he knows eats humans. He tastes like the richest cut of steak cooked medium rare and seasoned to perfection. Jesus Christ. This twisted situation had taken on a whole new level of wait, he seriously? Oh, absolutely. Marcel snorted, and he do it again. All for what happens when my stomach processes human. Bon, I clutched the diamonds. You're not going to hurt, Tanya? I asked. Marcel shook his head vigorously. God no, I kept delaying the wedding in hopes that she'd manage to find a way out, but I think Harold was getting bored with my cold feet. There would be plenty of other people willing to pay for her, even if my payment would be easily thrice what others would offer God. I was starting to feel a little dizzy here. I was talking to a human-eating groom. I glanced out the door and a horrible idea entered my brain, one that would surely earn Marcel's good favor and help out Tanya. So if I told Carol she could find her husband in the men's room? I asked. Marcel seemed puzzled for a second, but caught on quickly with a nod. He picked up the head and tossed it into one of the stalls. I heard it splash in one of the toilets and I almost started giggling. I was nearing hysteria. Go right ahead. I'll be waiting, he said as he kicked more limbs out of sight. I almost left when I had to ask one more question. What the hell are you? Marcel cocked his head to the side before he changed just for a second. One moment. He was a blood-soaked man, absolutely whoring, but normal. The next. He was a snake, sort of. His body was gone, replaced by the body of anaconda, but his head was still the same, minus the flick of a slim forked tongue from his mouth. Then he was back to normal. He responded with a shrug. Funnily enough, I was hoping you'd tell me. I don't have a clue. I left the bathroom and bumped into Carol almost immediately in the hallway. Well, where is he? She snapped. I just pointed a thumb towards the bathroom. Think he's not feeling so well? I said before I was nearly bowled over by the grumpy. I watched long enough for her to open the door, and for a scale tail to shoot out, snag her around the arm and drag her into the bathroom, before I headed back to the wedding. The problem seemed to solve itself. That night, Marcel came back, the men's room locked after apparently someone got quite sick in there. Da no longer had to behave a certain way to please her mom, and I think she had a good night. I used my backup camera to make sure to get all the pictures of her smiling Carol, and Harold vanished into thin air, never to be seen or heard from again, and those diamonds paid for quite the nice new camera. Like I said, it's been a year. I sure as hell haven't forgotten that wedding, but what prompted me to share it was that I got a friend request from T on Facebook. I normally don't accept friend requests from previous clients, but this one time I chose to make an exception. She does look so much better. She's going to college. She now sculpts and paints. She regularly volunteers at the women's shelter. I directed her to when we first meet, and every Friday night is group date night at the local arcade with some of Marcel's friends that now appear to be her friends as well. Apparently Marcel is quite the dance revolution master, but is terrible at shooting games. Her most recent picture was her and Marcel smiling, and she was holding up an ultrasound picture. I first met my brother when I was 10. It was weird. One day I was an only child. The next I had an older brother. My parents didn't even warn me. Just one day he arrived and took my room, and I had to sleep in the basement. He arrived in a large waxed raincoat. I remembered the water droplets that hung to its surface, as he leaned over me and offered his hand. I ran behind my mother's legs and stayed there. He smiled back. My mother apologized for me, and that it was obvious after a few days that he was their favorite. I had a lot of issues and I knew I was a disappointment to them. I visited a therapist twice a week, though I didn't talk much. I never did. I think that was my main problem. I was fine. My parents thought otherwise. One day my new brother came downstairs and handed me a used painting set and canvases. I ignored him, upset. He usurped me. He didn't say anything. Instead set up the easel and began to paint. He was incredible. I watched in awe as within minutes he had painted things I couldn't imagine were possible from a paintbrush. He finished with a painting of a door. It looked familiar, but I wasn't sure. He sat down the paints and walked back upstairs. I stared at it for weeks. Then one day I decided to try for myself. At first I was terrible, but as the months rolled on I got better and better. I still didn't have the confidence to speak to my brother, but every now and then he'd make his way into the basement and look at what I'd painted. He'd stare at them with nostalgia in his eyes. He would cry. I thought, hid behind the sofa, watching him mentally critique my work. "Keep it up," he said in a hushed tone. The hairs in my neck stood up and I felt a warm glow around me, something I'd not felt before. So I continued to paint. By the time I was a teenager, my brother was around less and less, but my painting was as good as what his was when he first showed me. I really wanted him to see what I created. It was all because of him. After all, I waited one day in the living room. I stole glances out of the window waiting for him to come home. When he did, I jumped out of my chair and ran to the door to greet him. He stepped back as if not wanting to embrace me. "Look at what I painted," I said to him. My parents appeared surprised. Even though I was 16, I rarely spoke. I ran to the basement door. "I think you should follow him," my mother said to my brother. I waited for what seemed like hours until my brother walked down the stairs. I could barely see his face under the hood of his wax jacket. "What do you think I offered?" He stepped into the light, examining the painting. Tears rolled down his cheeks. I put my hand to my mouth. "It's beautiful," he said quietly, and he began to cry, upset. I raced over to him and hugged him. "Thank you for teaching me," I said. I then felt his body sway. I tried to hold on to him, but my grasp wasn't strong enough. He collapsed, hitting his head on the side of my desk and onto the floor. The following months were the worst of my life. My brother was dead. Subscribe and never miss out on our fantastic videos.